Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Steph Sells Homes podcast. Today we have a very special guest. She is an attorney. Her name is Jessica Zamora. She specializes in car accidents. And so it's a very different topic from what I typically have on the show. But I thought it would be super informative, especially for a lot of the realtors, a lot of the people that follow me on here that are in real estate. We drive a lot. We are always on our phones. We are always doing things, a million things. And so I thought it would be kind of cool to have her on the show. And I'll share a little bit of backstory about how this episode came about. But first, I'll have her introduce herself. And once again, thank her for coming on the show.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Zamora. I'm a proud Salvadorian American. I'm from LA, born and raised in South Central. And my goal is to create content for our community, both in Spanish and English, educating them about our rights. So in particular, rights that come about whenever you're in a car accident or, God forbid, you get injured on a job. So that's my goal. And you can always find me on Abogada.Jess on Instagram and Abogada Jess on TikTok and Facebook, Abogada Jess. So please follow for more content.
I love that. Yeah. And before I met Jess, and I want to know a little bit more about your backstory and how you got started in law, really, because coming from South Central to where you're at now, is probably a cool, interesting story that can be relatable to a lot of the listeners. But let me take them back to how this episode came about. So Rosie, who's part of my team, hosted an open house. Now, the realtor that's currently listing Jess's property in Manhattan Beach, by the way, her house is on the market. That's how this whole episode came about. Rosie met her at her open house. And they hit it off well. Rosie's also Salvadorian, and she called me after the open house, at your property. When she left your property, she said, "Oh my God, I just met the owner from the listing that we were doing an open house at, and she's really cool. She's a lawyer. She's Latina. She's this, she's that." She just was raving about you, and I was like, okay, we need her on the podcast. and that's kind of how this episode came about. And I thought it was just really cool that it's all through relationships. The realtor who's listing your property, Rob, I actually closed the deal with him in Lakewood, and we hit it off well. I was representing the buyer. He was representing the seller at the time. And it was just a good collaboration. It's always good to find true professionals in the space. And I'm sure you deal with this a lot too. And in your respected field, there's some people that do well in business and others are just a headache to work with. And so Rob was one of those dope realtors that made it a smooth process. We hit it off well. So when he needed someone to do the open house at your property, he reached out to me. And I have a team of realtors. So that's when I told Rosie, I said, "Hey, I won't be in town, but you can go do it." Otherwise, I would have been there and you and I would have hit it off. But it all happens for a reason. And this is how it came about. So on the show, or Jessica, I think you go by Jess, right? Jess?
Yeah, I go by Jess, Jessica.
Yeah, just to keep it short. I know sometimes I do Steph, but that's enough with the backstory. I wanted to just share with people so they understand that it's all through relationships, how most of these episodes come about. So tell me a little bit more about how you said you grew up in South Central. How did you get out of there, right? Because I grew up in West Long Beach. So, how did you get out of there and, tap into the field that you're in? What intrigued you to get into law and kind of have a voice for all the Latinos, especially, which is dope, by the way.
I appreciate it. So I grew up in LA. And how did I get out? Very good question. And I always say education. When I went to college at UC Davis, which is 8 hours north, and after graduating from undergrad, I went straight through to law school, and I went to law school in New Jersey. So if anyone's listening to the podcast and is interested in potentially pursuing law as a career, I believe it's an extremely rewarding career. I have no complaints about it. It's not an easy journey. There was a lot of struggling, but it's completely worth it. And the reason why I decided to go into law was because when I was young, I saw that in South Central LA, there was a lot of crime, a lot of law enforcement interaction with people that didn't necessarily speak English. They mostly spoke Spanish, and as a kid, I was already translating for the community. And I'm sure anyone can relate. That's a first generation American here that, your parents probably don't speak English and you're translating from them from day one. So since I was a kid, I was like, you know what? I think I need to pursue a career in law. That way I can advocate, I can facilitate the communication, because instead of having an intermediate, I could just directly speak to the client, or I could directly speak to law enforcement. And that's kind of how I decided to go into law and got out of LA. And now I'm in Manhattan Beach because, again, hard work,
Education. Yep.
education, and yeah, and that's why I'm here.
Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree 100%. I think for me, what's helped change my mindset is education. And I can relate to having to translate at a very young age because I'm also first generation Mexican here in the States. And I remember having to translate like a mortgage statement, or, a lot of the real estate contracts are written with the lawyer terminology or from a lawyer's persona or expertise. So it's, through the years, I've learned how to read contracts and addendums and understood the terminology. But I can only imagine, like for first generation or our parents, like it was just hard, and it was a lot of pressure on us, having to translate at 8 years old, and then your mom or your dad being mad because like you didn't understand the terms.
They don't understand the legalese.
Like, what do you mean you don't understand this at 8 years old? Yeah.
Don't you go to school? No,
Yeah.
I know anyone that's listening to this, I know can really relate
Mm-hmm.
to days. But I thought that a career in law would definitely help, again, narrow this gap that we have, this communication gap between our community and law enforcement, or our community and well, in this particular, now that I'm a personal injury lawyer, claim adjusters and insurance companies. And one thing that I make a point of advocating for is people that don't have documents. A lot of people think that if you're undocumented, you don't have any rights, which couldn't be anywhere further from the truth. So even though I don't do immigration, if you've been a victim of a crime, especially like a hit and run or something like that, which could involve personal injury, I highly encourage people to talk to an immigration attorney, because there might be some avenues for you for citizenship or residency. And again, you can't quote me on this because I'm not an immigration lawyer, but I highly encourage people to talk to an immigration attorney. And as a personal injury lawyer, also, if you've been injured as a result of someone else's negligence, so you're in a car accident, you didn't cause it, and you don't have documents, that's not an issue. You can always file a claim, and you don't have to worry about disclosing your status, because in California there are jury instructions that state that we have no obligation, us lawyers, to disclose our client's immigration status. So there's no reason we would ever disclose whether you're a citizen or not, and that's irrelevant to any kind of analysis as to whether a car accident or not, or the negligence, or how injured you are. So those are things that I try to advocate and preach to our Latino community, because I understand there's a lot of miscommunication, there's a lot of fear, and people are scared of of getting involved with law enforcement or with attorneys. And I'm just trying to, as a Latina lawyer, trying to slowly but surely change the background and change the narrative.
Seriously, changing the narrative, because the fear mindset, or the fear-based mindset, is a real thing, especially in our Latino community. They don't know what rights they have. They don't know. Sometimes they're afraid, especially if they're undocumented. So like I said, I really like the fact that you push out a lot of content in Spanish. And we're going to be talking in Spanish a little bit later in the show, and just kind of finish it up with that. That's because I told Jess, like, it's important for me to continue to advocate for our Latino community and continue to educate them. But many times a lot of lawyers only speak English, and, there's a language barrier still. And just relatability. Like people that see you and I can relate. And if they hear our message in Spanish, then it seems like, okay, it seems one, attainable, and two, it's just less fearful to move forward and understand that they have rights at the end of the day. So my other question that I wanted to know, and I was just curious on the business side, how do you generate your business, as a lawyer and your niche, your specific niche? Like, do you have strategic relationships with these claim adjusters, or like how does that work? Because I want to learn.
Very good question. Well, so I'm a first generation Latina. My parents immigrated here from El Salvador. I have to work with the resources that I have. I don't have a lot of money to spend on billboards or commercials or
Right.
things of that sort. So one thing that I do is I use social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok to create video and content of information, again, that I believe will be helpful to our community. And so I've been able to get a couple of cases through social media, but a lot of it is actually through word of mouth and just building relationships with people. One thing that you want in a lawyer, and one thing you should look for, is can you trust your lawyer? People always ask me, like, what do you look for, or what should you look for when you're hiring a lawyer? And it's kind of like a real estate agent. It can relate the same way. It's like someone you trust, someone that will pick up the phone, someone that can explain to you the process, someone that has experience, someone that speaks your language. All these factors help, and create that trust. And sometimes when you see certain commercials and stuff, you might call, you might not get a call back, or maybe you will never speak to the lawyer, you'll speak to an assistant. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just, the difference between me and maybe like a big firm is that you're directly hiring a lawyer, and you're doing everything from A to Z, and I'll keep you updated on every process, and every stage of the process. And I have clients calling me, and I always tell my clients, like, it's okay, you can call me at any time, and you can call me as many times as you want. I will always pick up, and I'll explain to you, because you need that sort of trust with.
Yeah, well, there's that saying, like people work with people that they know, like, and trust. And it's the same in our business, in our industry. A lot of my business now over the last 10 years comes from relationships or people that know, like, and trust me, or that I've worked with in the past. A lot of it is word of mouth, and then also Instagram. I would say Instagram and TikTok. Still do Facebook for, like, a specific group of people. But yeah, for the most part, it's Instagram that's helped me build my business, and meetups. So I do a lot of real estate meetups because, like you said, we come from a certain background where we weren't exposed to this lifestyle, let alone a network. Like, we weren't given a network and here you go, here's the network that you can work with. So I had to build my own network within my niche, and the meetups really helped me through that. And Instagram has helped me cultivate that community. So I think you're doing great. And if you continue to do what you're doing on Instagram, I can see you having a pretty big community that follows you, and through time and relationships, they continue to refer you business. But that's really cool. I was just curious to know. So it seems like it's the same concept as it is with us. It's a relationship-based business. We're in the relationship business.
Yes. And I'm glad you asked, because we talked about this before the podcast started. At the end of the day, we like to relate things to real estate, and I feel like we're very similar, and our backgrounds are very similar. We're both first generation Latinas. We might be in a male dominated field, and we're breaking the glass ceiling as we speak. So and also, like, when you think about it, I just had someone message me yesterday on my Abogada Jess Instagram page, and she was like, I think you're the only woman Latina lawyer I know of. And it's kind of representation. Like, you don't see a lot of Latina lawyers out there, and also business owners and people that are, like, creating their own, like, legacy. But at the same time, I'm very clear about, like, my goals. And at the end of the day, when I'm putting out content, I'm making sure that people are are getting something out of my information. Like they're getting something, and whether they call me or they call another lawyer or they call any lawyer, they're at least looking into their rights. And that's the goal. That's the goal, because the last thing I want is to people to, forget, or not forget, but like to be afraid of pursuing something. And I know you can relate to this, us as Latinos, and we tend to be proud in the sense that, and I know you can relate, like maybe a dad or a grandpa, and I'm sorry to like
Stereotype.
stereotypical right here, but we all know we have to be a little bit more proud. And usually when there's a guy that's been injured, I get the wife calling me, and the wife being like, hey, my husband was just in an accident. And it's always like, oh, but I'm fine. And we always say like, oh yeah, like us in our culture, it's like you put some Vicks on it and it'll
Some savvy line, you're good.
yes, Ávila, or you go to El Salvador. And this, and one thing that I want to educate our community is that, yeah, you could do that, but it actually hurts any kind of case. So here, like in a personal injury case, and I keep saying personal injury to be more specific. In a car accident, whenever you're injured in a car accident, you have rights, which means you can pursue the insurance company for benefits such as getting your medical bills paid for, getting any lost wages taken care of, any pain and suffering, which means that like if you're suffering because you can't go to work, or you can't hang out with your family, things like
Right.
that, you recover like money for it. Like money is it's the compensation you're seeking. So a lot of people don't know that until like I tell them. I was like, yeah. And then another question that people ask me is, well, I see on these billboards, like this guy got me $1 million, this guy got me 100, this guy, how does that work? And I was like, well, sometimes it's a little misleading, because not every case is $1 million, not every case is 100, and
Right.
it's all determined by the insurance policy of the person who caused the accident. So this is a learning moment. I know we talked about learning, but
Learning. Right.
I want to advise any real estate agent that's listening to this to look into what insurance company they have, and to see what kind of insurance coverage you have, because the last thing you want is to only have liability insurance. And if you look at my videos, I even posted a video about insurance companies I would stay away from, because they're just notorious for denying claims. So you might be paying them every month for insurance coverage, and when you actually need them to cover your things, they might deny it. So it's kind of educating the community about those things. And so in California right now, the minimum coverage that's called liability coverage that you're supposed to have is $15,000 per accident. So God forbid you're in a car accident and you're injured and that person only has liability, you can only recover $15,000 up, or $30,000 if it's multiple people in an accident. So when you see those like $100,000 settlements and stuff like that, that might not apply to you if the person that hits you only has liability. Now, there's ways to protect yourself. And one thing we talked about, because you were like, yeah, real estate agents are always driving, always on the go.
They're always on the go.
Yeah, always on the go. And I know most of you are independent contractors, because I talked to you about this. So that means you work for yourself.
Right.
That means you need to protect yourself. And the best way for you to protect yourself is to add as much, and it's called uninsured motorist or underinsured motorist coverage to your insurance policy. So I encourage you to look at your insurance policy declaration page and see if you have uninsured motorist coverage. And if you do, see what the limits are. And I encourage everyone to get at least $100,000, if not more. If you can afford more, if you can afford $250,000 or even $500,000, I mean, your insurance premium is probably going to be pretty high, but you have a lot of money that you can tap into if, God forbid, you're ever in an accident and you're seriously injured. The worst thing that could happen, and I've had these cases, is when you're seriously injured. And I'll share this. I have 2 cases right now that I just settled. One of them settled for $100,000, where the guy had multiple surgeries.
Wow.
Yeah, he was riding a motorcycle. So I anyone riding a motorcycle, please have good insurance. He was riding a motorcycle and he got hit. So he had like maybe 5 surgeries, had like a testicle removed, had like everything you can think of.
Wow.
His injuries were excessive. If there was $1 million policy, most likely it would have been $1 million case, just because the medical bills were so excessive. But the person that hit him only had $100,000. So that's all he got. So that's one example. The other example is a tragic example. It was a passenger that was driving, that was being driven by her friend, and her friend unfortunately hit a wall and the passenger passed away. And the insurance of that, obviously you can't put a price on life. Never. Like,
Never, yeah.
even if it was $1 million, it wouldn't be enough for the family. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, their daughter means more than anything. But unfortunately, the policy of the car that was driven only has $15,000. And that's all the money the family can recover, regardless of whether there's a death. And these are examples that I give you guys so you are aware that, every case is different, but the only way you can do something about it right now and protect yourself is by adding as much money as possible to your insurance.
To your insurance.
Exactly. Under uninsured motorists and underinsured motorist coverage. So I encourage everyone to look and to at least get 100 if you can. If you can afford more, why not? Because there's no price in life. And honestly, accidents are accidents. You can never foresee when they're going to happen. So those are just little tidbits I give.
Yeah, no, good tips. And I feel like attaching a story, although they're tragic stories, I mean, it really will hopefully have people understand the importance of it, because we take it for granted that we're able to jump in the car every single day and ride back and forth. And, we don't think about these things, and you don't ever think that it's going to happen to you. That's the other thing too, right? So you feel like you don't need to prepare for it. So those are good examples. I got a car earlier this year, and I was struggling like with insurances because they were so expensive. I was calling around different ones. So what is your take on insurances right now? I feel like a lot of insurance companies are moving out of state. They're being based out of somewhere else. A lot of people don't want to insure cars anymore. Like, well, what's up with all that? Like, do you have more insight? I'm just curious again.
I've talked to colleagues about this because, yes, if you look at, I know there was just a big article about insuring new homes in California. Any old policies I think are still valid. Don't because I don't.
Yeah, same for homes. Yeah, not just cars. Yeah, it's like a thing.
And the reasoning for that was because there's been so many wildfires in California that have been burning all these homes that State Farm is basically bleeding money just paying out these claims. So when you think about maybe certain insurance carriers no longer insuring vehicles, I mean, don't quote me, but when I talk to colleagues about this, because I'm not in the insurance, I'm not an insurance broker.
Right.
It sounds like maybe there's just a lot of policies being or a lot of claims being paid out, and maybe it's not
profitable at this point anymore. Yeah.
Companies. So what I encourage everyone, and I did this video, and I encourage everyone that's listening to look at these videos where I talk about these insurance companies that are notorious for denying claims, and it kind of sucks because they tend to be insurance companies that target Latino communities. And the way they do this is they always say, hey, we can get you a cheap, super low rate if you switch with us. And it's sometimes it's like as little as $1 a day you pay for insurance. So of course people are like, well, sure, like I want to get something that's economical, something, and it's legal because it's minimum liability insurance. But what that does is it doesn't cover your car. Sometimes it definitely doesn't cover you. And and if like someone hits you, it's not your fault that the accident occurred. And that's always the situation I'm faced with. It's not your fault. Someone hit you and you're like, pero tengo seguranza, I have insurance. Unfortunately, that insurance is not going to cover you. It's not going to cover your car. It's not going to cover passengers. It's not going to cover anyone, because it only comes into play if you are the one that caused the accident. And 2, sometimes it doesn't cover other people that you let borrow the vehicle. So it's very specific. It might only cover you and only you if you're driving. So God forbid your son or your daughter takes out the car, and I've had cases like this where
Right.
daughter's driving the vehicle and they get in an
Mm-hmm.
accident. The insurance doesn't cover it, and they're considered. And this is another video I made. They're considered a Prop 213 under California. If you're driving with no insurance, they would
I think I saw that one. Yeah.
they would be considered not driving with insurance whatsoever. Even though there's insurance in the car, it doesn't cover them.
It doesn't apply to them. Yeah. Wow.
So a lot of tidbits, and I always say this because there's a Spanish saying that says "lo barato sale caro," and I agree. Like, so always, I encourage people to, if you're gonna buy auto insurance, people are like, "What auto insurance do I go to?" Like, I'm not in the business of selling auto insurance, so I have no skin in the game. But
you just know what would benefit them, which is not the basic one.
I just from my experience, I know which companies are like notorious for things, which companies aren't. So what I say is, like, if you can stay away from anything that has the name General, like National General, Western General, the General, Kemper, Alliance, Infinity, they're all like in the same umbrella. Fred Loya, Aspire General, which is another general. I would stay away from them just because, again, they're notorious for denying claims, and they might not cover you in case, God forbid, you're in an accident because of that liability aspect of it. It's only liability. Now, if you look at bigger companies like State Farm, AAA, Progressive, Geico, Travelers, Farmers, AAA, I don't know if I said it, but these bigger companies tend to be better at following through and paying out claims. Allstate. So,
right.
I would look into that and again, add as much uninsured motorist coverage. So at the end of this, if you're still listening and you learn anything, it's just
that's the takeaway there. Make sure you write that down. Uninsured
motorist coverage.
Yeah. There you go. See, I'm learning too. I'm like, all right, I got to add that. Or I don't even know if I have it. Probably not, but we'll find out after this. Yeah. That's so cool. Well, I mean, I think you've shared a lot of information, a lot of insight, and I see the videos, I see the content. It's a lot of educational, and you do it in a way where it's digestible for the average, like, client, whether it's in English or Spanish. And I know that we wanted to talk about it in Spanish, so as we sort of wrap up in the next 10, 15 minutes, I figured we could share a little bit more in Spanish. And I liked what you were talking about earlier with people who don't have papers. I think in Spanish, that would be really dope to kind of share with people. So maybe you can kind of touch a little bit on that en español. Para todos los que nos están escuchando, estamos hablando con Jessica, que es una abogada y se enfoca en accidentes de carros, hace demasiados videos en Instagram y en TikTok, tienen que verla para que aprendan un poquito más sobre diferentes derechos que ustedes tienen como ciudadanos o no ciudadanos aquí. Creo que muchas veces la gente no sabe y no conocen el proceso y no conocen sus derechos, y Jessica ha sido, la verdad, que una inspiración para mucha gente latina porque está como que representando a la comunidad latina, ¿no? Al educarnos sobre nuestros derechos. Así es que adelante, Jessica.
Muchas gracias. Como les estaba diciendo, yo soy abogada latina, mis papás son de El Salvador. Mi motivo de hacer estos videos es que quiero que todos conozcan sus derechos, especialmente la comunidad que no tiene documentos. Bastantes gente tiene miedo de perseguir sus derechos y piensan que quizás no pueden agarrar beneficios que ciudadanos pueden si en caso están lesionados en el trabajo o si se lesionan en el carro. So, lo que yo hago es trato de hacer videos con información para ayudar a la comunidad. Y lo que le estaba diciendo a Stephanie anteriormente es que si usted es una persona que está en este país y no tiene documentos, todavía puede perseguir un reclamo con el seguro para beneficios si usted ha sido lesionada. Por ejemplo, los beneficios que puede recibir es agarrar pagos para sus costos médicos, también puede agarrar pagos para cualquier sufrimiento que tenga, y si está perdiendo de trabajo o algo así, podemos pedir eso, pero mejor hable con un abogado.
Que se especializa en eso, ¿verdad?
Que se especialice. Y otra cosa es, si usted ha sido víctima de un crimen, a veces es mejor hablar con un abogado de inmigración, porque pueden haber opciones para usted para quedarse o algo así, pero no estoy segura, por eso les digo a todos, mejor con un abogado de inmigración. Los abogados van a saber mejor cómo darle consejos. Y ya.
Yeah, y eso fue lo que me gustó, porque a veces mucha gente, y conocemos a muchos que no tienen documentos y no saben si es que pueden, si es que tienen ciertos beneficios. Y una de las cosas que me habías dicho es de que you don't have to disclose, no sé cómo se dice disclose en español, pero no tiene que decir básicamente el estatus migratorio de la persona, ¿no? No se tiene que decir esa información al momento de querer, ¿cómo se dice? Like exercise the benefits, right?
De meter reclamo. Una cosa que yo hago en mis videos es que yo aprendí español de mis padres. Nunca fui a escuela para escribir y aprender español. El único español.
Lo aprendió traduciendo a los 6 años.
Yeah. Conozco. Cuando yo hablo en mis videos y hago videos en español, los hago con lenguaje que hablo, el mismo lenguaje que yo uso para comunicarme con mi familia, comunicarme con mis amigos. Como está diciendo Stephanie, cuando usted hace un reclamo con el seguro, no tiene que decirles qué estado tiene usted en este país. Y hay reglas y hay leyes que dicen que nosotros como abogados no tenemos ninguna obligación de decirle al seguro qué estado. Por eso les digo a todos, mejor hablen con un abogado. Los abogados estamos aquí para ayudar. Y otra cosa que yo quiero hacer como abogada es quiero enseñarle al mundo que nosotros podemos ayudar, nosotros abogados latinos podemos ayudar a nuestra comunidad. Y no hay muchos de nosotros que hablamos español, que hacemos lesiones personales. La mayoría de nosotros estamos en inmigración, pero yo hago lesiones. Si usted ha tenido un accidente y necesita una abogada o tiene cualquier pregunta legal, siempre les digo, mejor llámenme y yo les ayudo.
Y creo que, pues, para cerrar el episodio, le agradezco a Jessica que nos haya dado tanta información, pero creo que también como latinos es bueno saber que hay gente latina que nos puede ayudar con el proceso. Creo que, como dijo Jessica, si han tenido lesiones, si tienen, no sé, cualquier tipo de servicio o alguna pregunta en aspectos legales, sería bueno tener a Jessica en parte de su equipo, de sus relaciones, ¿no? Porque a veces nosotros como latinos tenemos miedo a preguntar. Estábamos hablando yo y Jessica de eso. A veces nos da miedo preguntar, no sabemos los derechos, no queremos saber, o mandamos a los hijos a que vayan y averigüen la información, pero es bueno que uno se eduque, porque al momento de educarse ustedes van a sentirse con más derechos, van a aprender un poquito más sobre el proceso, pero más que nada se van a poder comunicar con Jessica, que es una persona independiente, es latina y conoce nuestra cultura, conoce cómo es que hemos estado educados o hemos estado quizás en una cajita donde no nos hemos explorado y no es como que tratar con una compañía grande, ¿no? A Jessica le pueden hablar las veces que quieran. Yo le he enviado mensajes y me contesta rápido, así que es una persona, ¿me entienden? No estamos hablando con un robot ni con una máquina, es una persona, de una persona a otra persona que realmente quiere ayudar a la comunidad latina.
Exactamente.
Right? I'm like, right?
Yeah. Ayudo a cualquier persona que necesite. Y lo que les digo a todos es, si yo no sé cómo ayudarle, quizás conozco a alguien que sí pueda.
Exacto, ya.
Y no dudar. Si me necesitan, estoy en las redes sociales en abogada.jess, Jess, o también me pueden llamar a 1-888-818 5377 y yo contesto todas las llamadas.
Yes, y por favor apunten el número porque yo creo que es una de las pocas o la única abogada que conozco yo que habla español y que vive aquí cerca. Y una de las cosas que también quería decirle para todos los que nos están escuchando, Jess tiene su casa en venta, así es que si alguno de ustedes quiere comprar una casa y quizás quieran consultar conmigo y con Jess, aquí estamos para ayudarles y ojalá y podamos encontrar un comprador para su casa porque necesita venderla ya, desde ayer. Para mudarse a su próxima casa o su próximo proyecto, pero igual, en fin, quería agradecerte otra vez te quería decir gracias, Jess, por estar en el episodio y gracias a todos los que nos están escuchando en español. He estado tratando de poner más contenido en español porque sé que se necesita educar a la comunidad latina y aquí estamos como dos latinas representando el día de hoy. Así que muchísimas gracias y nos vemos en el próximo. So I just pretty much said, and just thanking Jess again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys on the next one.
Yeah.